black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and for those of you who are new to the Umoja Circle, the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And another aspect of the Umoja Circle that I believe in is that through dialogue can there only be a shift of consciousness. Okay, and when there's a shift of consciousness, there's a shift in your world or your worldview. And this is just a continuation of where I left off. This is part two of a two-part series that I left off. Basically, I've been looking at the news and hearing debates about such things as the Constitution, and the lately has been the at the beginning of the first show, I had a little video clip talking about the 14th Amendment, and it's a bedrock of the United States. And it had me thinking in my research. I always try to study and bring history. Like I said in the first show at the beginning, that in order to understand the present moment, you have to understand the precedent. How did we get to this moment? And you'll find out of its choices and decisions. And true history is fascinating, not the mythology. I talked about it in the first show. I talked about a gentleman by the name of Bancroft, whose writings is where we get this origin story about Hamilton and Madison and those so-called founding fathers. But it was a much complicated story. Many times they didn't even like each other. And the thing that they created that we always talk about, and actually in next year in 2026 is going to be the 250th anniversary of the Constitution. And so we're going to be a lot of people talking about it. Going to be a lot of shows about the revolution, but it's going to be based on mostly a fantasy. The real story of the founding of the Constitution is very complex, and we're only getting let's say a sanitized version. And again, what I usually find in certain books, and I went and found this book called Birthright Citizens. I think I'll put it up there a little closer to get a little closer look. So a lot of this talk is going to be on this, based on this book. And there's another book here that called Slavery Defended. I read books about people who I don't agree with, okay, those who defend it, but I want to know how they think, why they do the things and made the decisions in the past that is still affecting us to this day. And still, you see that kind of thinking in the minds of those who are in the MAGA movement. It's the same type of thought process that was in men back in the early 1700s, early 1800s, when it comes to how they interact with people that look like me. This book talks about the birthright citizenship, which is in the news to this day. And like I said in the first show, citizenship was part of the dialogue by black people who did in things like conventions and what have you. I have a book here called The Colored Convention Movement, and we were part of that. Going back into the late 1820s, 1830s, we gathered together in political movements from many different states, and we came together and talked about the same thing we're talking about today. What is our rights as citizens? Okay, this is before the 14th Amendment. Let me get that straight. During the periods of time of the compromises in federal government, we talked about what was going on because how it was effective. During the time of the colonial movement, when they tried to move us off send us to Haiti and send us to Liberia and places like that, we refused. Some of us went. Heck, some of us fought with the with the British during the Revolutionary War. We wanted to be free because the government that existed at the time of the Constitution, at the time of the Revolution, was a government that was against the rights of black people. Okay, we were enslaved. And even if you were a citizen, you still were segregated. You still had black laws that were being produced, and we talked about it. And we worked through the system. Resistance. What you see as your rights in America today, and these amendments, it didn't come from the founding fathers. It came from those who resisted the Constitution that they created in 1787. That's my point. Let's go on to these slides. I got a series of slides I want to show you. Okay, this is the book that like I said, I read, called Birthright Citizenship, A History of Race and Rights in Antebellum America. That means before the Civil War, by Martha S. Jones. It usually focuses on the state of Maryland and places like Baltimore, and how black people came together and what they had and the pressures they were under when they were talking about, especially free blacks. These are not enslaved blacks, these were free blacks. See how complicated the system was produced? Okay, and the Constitution allowed this to happen, okay? This vaunted document that we so are happy about. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay. During their constitutional debates, this is the Founding Fathers, which would last between May 25th to September 17th of 1787, there was a concept of a Bill of Rights proposed by some delegates like Benjamin Franklin, okay, that included protections like due process that we associate with the Bill of Rights. But this person down there, Alexander Hamilton, said, and James Madison, all these folks that you talk about as founding fathers, they said no to anything that had to do with rights. In fact, Alexander Hamilton wrote about it in the Federalist Paper number 84. If you're not familiar with the Federalist Papers, it's a series of 88 essays that were done by John Jay, Alexander Hamilton, and James Madison, in which they wrote different reasons why you needed this thing called the Constitution. And that's what they sent out to all the different states who had to ratify, especially the larger states like New York, Virginia, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, and the such. And they tried to explain all these different articles of but they didn't have no Bill of Rights in there. Let's get that straight. In fact, in Federalist Paper number 84, written by Hamilton, where he said that a Bill of Rights was not only unnecessary but dangerous. Were you taught this in school? But you were given this somehow given this origin story that you assume that everybody was about the people. No, he was about the elites. He would agree with the MAGA today, because that's who he was talking about, the bankers. Those was we the people, the corporations of those times, the zeitgeist, or the thinking of that age. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, the Founding Fathers, they believed that the government shouldn't have to spell out what it should, couldn't do, okay? Okay, that's that arrogant elite. Yet somehow, due process and these other protections, or what we call the Bill of Rights, upon which we all rely on today, made it in. How? It was not because of Hamilton or Madison changed their mind. It was not because of any kind of legal brilliance. Let's go on to the next one. It was because of resistance. Because during the ratification phase, that's between 1787 and 1789, when it's finally ratified, process, state by state, vote by vote, debate by exhausting debate throughout the colonies at the time, many of the major colonies refused to sign and ratify the Constitution if a Bill of Rights was not put in it for citizens of the United States. So when you hear people today talking about, I said this in another show, when you hear people today say that the original intent of the Founding Fathers, they're talking about what Hamilton and Madison intended for the before the Bill of Rights. So any of the Supreme Court judges, conservative Supreme Court judges who are denying what was written after the Civil War, the voting rights of black people, or the things that have been put up by the White House about citizen rights. Well, that's on the line. That's my point. Because when they start talking about original intent, the original intent was before the founding fathers, before they got it ratified. It was not what they wanted. They were forced to take the Bill of Rights and put it into the Constitution. It was not freely given by those founding fathers that everybody hold on a pedestal. Let's get this straight. Let's go on to the next one. They were forced to put those 10 amendments in. Massachusetts itself said, we will ratify only if you promise to put those amendments in. In Virginia, ratification only passed by 10 votes. New York City even more loudly said even their ratification and accurate by 3 votes. They passed it by just 3 votes, barely, okay? You're not taught this in school. This is how we got the Fifth Amendment, okay, and the 10th Amendment, and all these other amendments, and all those that were added on afterwards, including the 14th Amendment. Again, we had to go through a civil war in order for the amendments that were given to people of African descent, okay, and barely given to white Americans who were in the elite before that. Let's go on to the next. Okay, like I said, it wasn't until after the Civil War and the passing of the 14th Amendment and in 1868 that the language of due process forced states to tenuously apply due process for black people in this country. And that's 81 years after the Constitution was written in 1787, okay? And they're talking about it right now. They're using immigrants as an excuse to manipulate it, but if that thing is changed, if that thing is stopped, if these Supreme Court judges today say they want to go back to the original intent of the founding fathers, and that thing is tenuous, okay? It was never solid as we are taught. Let's go on to the next. That's why I said, therefore, there must be an honest question today's American citizens must be willing to ask, such as, what if the United States Constitution was strictly written for elite white men? It was. What if the original republic, founded in 1787, the original constitutional document that started out with these words, "We the people," only meant white men and not only people, not all people in this country? That's what it did. At the top of the Constitution, it said, "We the people." But Hamilton and Madison, even Washington did not consider the rabble, the everyday folks, that document meant. It was for the elites, no different than what's going on with these billionaires today. That's who these founding fathers would be agreeing with. That's who they saw as the bedrock of this country, okay? The economic bedrock, okay? The social bedrock. Not the barber, but it was resistance to what they were trying to put together that we got these things put in. And it's always been the resistance to what the government was putting out. We've been doing it as black people throughout the civil rights movement, right? That's why we had that March on Washington in 1963. Wasn't he saying that there was a check that bounced, okay? Even though we were free in 1865, right? 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment in 1868, and in I think it was 1870, you had the Voting Rights Act. But why did we have to march in the 1960s to get our voting rights? Okay, just because you had the amendment doesn't mean that people would apply the laws that will give you that right, okay? And they're fragile. and they could be easily changed. That's the point I want you to understand. So you see people knocking on the door of the 14th Amendment right now, using the immigrants as an excuse. They're trying to change that, folks. And if that goes, then so does our rights go as people of African descent and other people who have benefited from that 14th Amendment. Let's go on to the next. We got to ask these questions. Was the U.S. Constitution written so that citizenship was specifically limited by law for free white persons? Yes, and was free white men. Women didn't have rights. Abigail Adams, when they had that constitutional convention, when John Adams went there, she told him when he was leaving, don't forget about us ladies. And they forgot about you ladies too. Did the original Constitution, written in 1787, protect slavery at every turn? Yes. Counting enslaved people as only 3/5 of a person, while denying them any legal standing in the newly formed United States government. And the Constitution forced free states to return enslaved people back into bondage, for example. That was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, okay? Just like you got people running around snatching folks off the streets today, they were doing that to black folks who left the South and Underground Railroad and ended up in places like Boston or New York. They were getting snatched by slave catchers. The same thing. If you don't understand the past, you won't understand what's going on today. This is nothing new, but you got to understand the system that is fragile. And if you don't be vigilant, we weren't vigilant last year in November of 2024, and look what we got in there. Because that's what the founding fathers who wrote this said. If you don't be vigilant, then it's the system that they know they established is easily corrupted. And guess what we have today? Let's go on to the next one. Okay, like I was saying, don't forget that the men who wrote the Constitution were mostly all enslavers of their political enablers. In fact, those original founding fathers' ideology demanding that the liberty and the economic prosperity of white men required the enslavement of the majority of black people in this country. Even though I said the first show there was black citizens, but the majority of black people in this country were enslaved. And the whole economic system of this country was about enslavement. At the time of the rise of the industrial age, the United States was propped up by enslavement. In fact, Andrew Jackson, President Andrew Jackson, who happened to be Trump's favorite president, said that the value of a land that when people were going west, he said the value of the land did not become valuable until there were black bodies toiling on that land. That's when the value came in, because they're the one who cleared it, planted it, did the work. And don't call us lazy people. We built this country. But that Constitution did not work for us, okay? Let's go on to it. Let's go on to the next one. I know this sounds harsh, but this is what the history that they take. They don't want you to read. They want you to, that's why they're taking books off the shelves. But it's kind of late now. It's like the horses already left the barn and too late to close the barn door. This information is already out there. It's in books. Like you said, there's a few books I have on my desk will answer most of these questions. For centuries, America has been covering up the fact that liberty and justice for all was never meant for everyone in its original form. The writing in the original form of the Constitution, sent out to be ratified in 1787, lasted at least for a little over the first 80 years. That's the thing I want to emphasize. It was not meant for everybody. Ending with the Reconstruction Amendment, 1314-15, after the end of the brutal and bloody Civil War. It was not given up calmly. It had to be a civil war where close to over 700,000 men died. Almost 200 black men fought in that war. We're not given our rights. And black people used the Emancipation Proclamation. I know it did not free anybody, but you can't tell our black brothers and sisters in the South, they freed themselves with their feet. That's how they made it work. Resistance. The system that you are always putting up about the Constitution didn't work for us for nearly 100 years after the signing of it. Let's get that straight. And then we had to deal with another 100 years of Jim Crow segregation, which is another hell on earth for black people. That's why we had to go into the civil rights movement. And then in the last 60 or 70 years, we're still dealing with the institutionalized racism, and we got in place people who want to try to destroy the little bit we got since the 1960s and bring us back even before the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. Let's go on to the next one. This is serious, folks. Let's go on to the next one. A lot of American citizens today actually believe that the 14th Amendment is safe. That's why I'm laughing. That the constitutional language, especially in the 14th Amendment, is somehow self-executing. Also, that it has to mean what it looks like means to you. But that's what it means. That's what it looks like to you. It means that it's not self-executing. There's laws that have to pass that enable that amendment to be empowered. What happened with the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment? Well, what did segregation did? Okay, there were still black codes that were done in the 1780s and 90s by Mississippi. Our people were still put in the conditions that they were in before the 13th Amendment, even though they were American citizens. Okay, there were still people picking cotton in the same kind of conditions on plantations, but they were American citizens. Okay, getting plantation coins instead of getting money. Okay, no different. But you still had a 14th Amendment. You still had a 15th Amendment. Let's go on to the next. The modern understanding of the 14th Amendment, equal protection, birthright citizens, due process, and all these things that we're saying is our right as American citizens is just that, something that came out of the modern times that had nothing to do with the founding fathers. To be exact, it is the post-Civil War amendments that we started seeing signs of individual liberty. But even then, it took resistance. Understand that the 14th Amendment has never been safe. Courts have twisted the 14th Amendment from its ratification on July 9, 1868. In other words, you got corporations under the 14th Amendment are told they should be treated like individual American citizens. This came out after, in the 1800s, late 1800s. Corporations got their rights as citizenship under the 14th Amendment. So even though you have these things, other people have been abused. That's one of the things that the founding fathers, who rightfully thought how fragile, that they created a system that is still fragile, but they put it off to future generations. And we're not doing a good job of keeping ourselves in tune with what these rights are, okay? And you've seen the results today. That's why I'm talking about the past, so you can understand what you're seeing coming forth from your televisions and in your apps right now, today. You got somebody who is ignoring even the Constitution and doing what they want to do, okay? And that was what the founding fathers feared. When it was easily corrupted if it wasn't anything vigilant. If people didn't understand what was going on, they would be hoodwinked and bamboozled by corrupt people who would use the Constitution wrong. And we've seen it happen right now in the 21st century. Let's go on to the next. For decades after its ratification, United States courts twisted and narrowed the 14th Amendment's meaning, even telling people that wrote it who were still alive, and that was in the 1870s, and we're told it didn't even mean what it said. Now, they're the people who wrote the dang thing, okay? The 14th Amendment And these were the radical Republicans who were in charge after the Civil War. The 14th Amendment says that anyone born in the United States is a citizen, yet was still used to exclude Chinese immigrants, to sidestep indigenous peoples' authorities, and rationalize racial segregation. Even though it says in bold letters that anyone born in the United States is a citizen and has the right of any citizen, white or black, it doesn't matter. But it was not how it was presented or carried out in the latter part of the 1800s and most of the early 1900s, or even after the Civil Rights Movement. 100 years later, from the 1868 to 1968, we still had all kind of racial issues, even though we had the 14th Amendment, and we still had to ask for votes, and Medgar Evers still got shot because he tried to register people to vote. We had that amendment, and what good did it do us? If you don't apply it, just have an amendment, and now they want to try to get rid of it. You see the problem that's facing us right now. We better wake up. Let's go on. The 14th Amendment didn't mean much until around the 1920s. Yet it wasn't until the 1950s and 1960s that the U.S. court began to build anything like a modern rights most people today think of as settled. It wasn't settled in 1787. Heck, it was barely settled after a civil war. And in fact, the people who fought for the Confederacy, they just started fighting the war in the political arena. That's why you got to be aware. Politics is war without bloodshed, but war is nothing more than politics with bloodshed. Okay, the Civil War never really ended. It just went on and changed location from the battlefield, like Gettysburg, to the floor of Congress and the Senate. And we're still fighting that war right now. If you listen to MAGA, let's go on to the next one. The 14th Amendment is not any kind of constitutional bedrock. That we keep on saying that bedrock. No, it's not. That's how the Constitution works. It is precedent. And what it means by precedent, it means that there's a law that somebody made a ruling 20 years ago, and that sets the precedent. So any judge that has something similar, a similar situation, he look at that previous law or precedent, how that court dealt with it, and he makes a decision today based on that. Always have to go to the past in order to be able to deal with things right in front of you in the future, okay? Even the idea of birthright citizens, even the idea of the birthright citizen has always been a fragile, especially for black Americans in this country since the ratification in 1789. That's been the theme I'm trying to let you know. Let's go on to the next. It's got a few more. In that book that I base it on, okay, this addressed the struggle. So if you want to read that book, this is the book. Let me show you again the book that I'm talking about. Next one, let's go to the next one. Yes, that's the book. This will talk about the struggle of the birthright citizen. That's coming up in the news today. Let's go on to the next. According to this book, this was a period right after the Constitution was ratified in 1789, where the free blacks who were considered citizens in the 1810s, 1820s, and 1830s, yes, they were black citizens, but they didn't have any rights basically because they started developing black laws. Had to constantly fight for the same rights found in the Constitution's Bill of Rights because the Constitution was constantly interpreted differently for them. And guess what it's doing today? Those who are in power. If you're not vigilant, folks, I'm going to stop it right here. If you don't understand what happened in the past, you will always be doomed to repeat it. That's what George Santayana meant by those words. If you don't learn the lessons of the past, you were doomed to repeat it. But it is in books, folks. We did have conventions. We did talk about it. So any you kids who are talking about why black people never communicate, let's do these things, we've always done things. If you read this book, you'll find all the things that we've done. But anyway, I gotta go. Until next time, peace, hotep, bye-bye.